We've got another question here.
My question is related to this because I think what I think that previous question was getting at is what's meaningful to young people. And I thought it was interesting that you said what's wrong with our teachers, our teenagers as the title, because in my experience, teenagers seem to be moving much, much more towards doing something meaningful with their lives. Like the real issue is I've got to try and find some meaning. You know, I work with the Defence Forces, and so consequently we get these young people who actually want to make a difference in the world. That's why they're there. And more I'm finding that, you know, the disillusionment that comes is coming from a world that to them doesn't seem to be getting any better. Young people in this generation, more than our generation, have lived with war for so long. So I'm wondering whether, is this actually the real issue, maybe, that what is wrong, you know, what we're talking about is that they are now dealing with a world that's been at war since 2001 and they don't know what is meaningful anymore, like what is the meaning of their lives and what's going to be the future. Is it going to be more war or what's it going to be? So I'm interested to know whether the panel has got that sort of feedback from this young generation that's now grown up since they were, you know, little babies, basically, with war.
And it's interesting, perhaps if I can encapsulate that, one of the questions is how much does hope matter? How much does faith in the future matter? Don?
One of the dimensions of adolescent stress, if you look at the literature that comes out time and time again and fairly prominently, is what I guess we can loosely call the stress of future uncertainty. So you're absolutely right. There's that level of unpredictability about what is going to happen. It's an age-related thing, incidentally, with younger adolescents not being too worried about the future because for them, you know, the future is 2 years hence. For 17, 18, 19-year-olds, and they're still technically in adolescence, they are worried about the future. Will there be another war? Will there be global famine? Will there be environmental effects that we simply can't cope with? But they're also worried about their own future. Will I get a job? Will I be able to support a family, and therefore will I be able to have a family? Will I be able to afford the kinds of material things that my parents have? And in some cases they won't. So that projection out into the future and not being able to predict, not being able to understand what's out there is a major source of stress for adolescents.
Charlie, I know this is something you've looked at too because you've dealt with that concern over where's the world going to. Tell me your response.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, the fears and the threats are the same, but how we respond to them depends on a whole lot of variables. And I think in some cases, young people will look at these fears and go, oh my God, I do not want to have anything to do with it, and they'll settle for something, you know, very much less than what they're capable of. And then others will rise to the challenge and say, I'm going to take this on. But either way, I think there definitely is a hell of a lot of uncertainty and fear about the future, definitely.
Larry?
Well, I would just want to pick up something that Don said, and I'm not disagreeing with Don. I mean, I think he's right in one sense. But let me just make a point. There are a number of studies being conducted in Australia on a longitudinal basis that are being supported by various government agencies, and they are looking at youth, amongst other things, they're looking at youth ambition and the sorts of things that young people already in their, let's say, starting at year 9, what sorts of things do they really expect that they will do once they leave school and go into the workplace? And the interesting thing is that they're extremely, not only are they ambitious, but they're very optimistic. There are far more young people who believe that they're going to attain a professional occupation than there are people in the professional occupations in society. In other words, there aren't niches there to accommodate all of these ambitions that young people do have. Now, that may sound like a potential for disaster and all of that, but when they surveyed these people after they were in the workforce, they found that those young people who did not reach the expectations that they had aspired to were nonetheless just as satisfied with the jobs that they had as those who did reach their expectations. So there is I guess the point that I would like to add is that there is a lot of resiliency, and the way that people adjust their ambitions, their expectations, as they progress through their adolescent years and they begin to realize what their own capabilities are, and perhaps realize a little bit better what the adult society is like that they're aspiring to.
Perhaps just following on from that, Larry, how do you engage teenagers? How do you motivate them to be positive, to be involved, to see a hopeful future for themselves?
Well, I think they're probably more engaged than perhaps we imagine. That would be my perspective. And I think one of the reasons is that if we look particularly here at the ACT, and these observations may not be true in every part of Australia, that basically in the ACT you've got some of the highest performing young people in the world when it comes to educational achievement. And according to international standards, international comparisons, if you separate out the ACT secondary school children, you will find that the ACT compares favorably with all countries in the world, including those that as countries are at the top of the list in terms of achievement. So the other thing that we know is that young people who do achieve highly in school are also those who get along with their teachers, they're engaged with the school, they're involved with things that are happening in school. Now that doesn't mean that there's a minority who are not potential dropouts or disengaged. Of course there are, and we're talking about those. But at least if we look at that particular indicator, it looks like from one perspective, at least our teenagers are doing pretty well.
But perhaps all that says is that this is an affluent, well-educated, very
Well,
middle-class
this goes back to
place.
the previous point. That's right.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Question up here.
Yes, I'm just wondering on that point about being engaged and also the increasing secularisation. Canberra is a particularly secular place, and I'm just wondering if the panel thinks that there's actually a link, whereas before our values were possibly dictated to us, and that the idea was that if you went to church or wherever and said the right thing, that you'd get this guaranteed life, that we didn't need to worry. Whereas now, without that sort of guarantee there, the kids seem to be more engaged. Well, hang on, this is up to me. This is about my community, my world, and I need to be active in that and meet the values of this community. And that seems to make them much more active in social work and in environmental issues and the like, rather than the old promise that basically almost whatever you did, as long as you went and apologised, you were going to be okay.
Jessica, I'm going to put that to you because you picked up on that point of not necessarily being a divide between religion and values. And
I would say that I would disagree with the premise, I think, of that, and say that I don't think there's a correlation between levels of spirituality or religious engagement and the ability to think critically. I think that, feeling like the decisions that you make are yours is always important, regardless of whether that's in a faith context or a secular context, and believing in the decisions that you make and being engaged in that respect is always important, but I don't think that it's an either or thing.